Welcome gardeners, Lindsay here with the Mindful Living Movement, and today we're going to talk about probably one of my favorite subjects, and that is drip irrigation in your garden, specifically in regards to spring prep and getting your garden going using drip irrigation for the early part of the season. So when we're talking direct sowing seeds into the garden and also transplanting your, new fresh plants from the greenhouse or whatever you started inside, how do you use all of these things for success? So that is what we're going to talk about today, because it's a little bit more complex than just setting up your drip tubing and sort of letting it do its thing. So this is part of my strategy for easy setup in the springtime. I sort of have an order of operations, if you will, and this guy kind of falls about the middle of the road. After I've done all my soil prep, before I put up my low tunnels, I will lay out all of my irrigation tubing because it helps me to just add all these extra things afterwards, and I don't have to try and, fight with tubes and getting it hooked and damaging starter plants and so on and so forth. So make sure that you put out your irrigation tubing, lay it out, the structure of it, before you seed start, before you put transplants into the ground. I have done it the opposite way many times, where I've sort of half planted, then laid out my starter plants, then put out, tubing and whatever. And anytime you're trying to add it after the fact, you're going to risk probably damaging your starter plants if they're transplants, or you're going to sort of move the dirt where you've seeded into, and maybe your seeds end up going somewhere else. So put it sort of middle of the road before you direct sow, before you transplant. The other thing with getting ahead and laying out all of your irrigation and tubing and all that good stuff a little while before you start to actually think about putting plants or seeds in the ground is so that you can make sure to go and source all the materials and connections and tubing and all the good stuff that you're going to need. There's a lot of really finicky little tiny pieces that go into this. It's kind of like grown-up Legos. You can build anything, you can design it in any way you want, but it takes a little bit of thinking, a little bit of mapping, drawing, maybe going to your local irrigation company to make sure that you are setting it up for your garden in the best way possible. One of the things that does often happen when you reuse your drip system from year to year as well is you're probably going to break something along the way. I try to leave everything together as much as I possibly can and just gently roll it all up and tape it. But a lot of the little connection pieces, they can get snapped off somewhere along the way, whether putting it away at the end of the season or pulling it out at the next. So having, extra little connectors and stuff like that's always a good idea. Giving you some time to go around and just patch everything before you really need your system up and running is really, really helpful. Now, as far as in the springtime, all the little different sort of tubing and sprayers and all that good stuff, what you actually need. So what is usually more known is drip tubing. This is sort of what we think about when we think about drip irrigation lines. And this is going to be what you want to use mostly throughout your garden. This is kind of like your main irrigation for the majority of the season, but it's not super great for seed starting in the springtime. And you have to be a little bit careful with how you use it. So as you can see here, I've actually got two different types. They come in different colors. It just so happens that the brown here has the little drip emitters every 6 inches, and then the black actually has the drip emitters every 12 inches on this one. If you're growing a regular vegetable garden where your plants are pretty close together, shoot for the 6 inch. You're gonna pay a little bit more for it, but 12 inches is pretty far apart. This is what I started with in my vegetable garden, and I really needed to sort of double back a lot more to make sure that I had enough holes to properly irrigate my whole garden. Now I tend to use this more in sort of like the perennial areas of my garden where I don't need emitters quite as close, but otherwise my vegetable garden, I really like this 6 inch. So this is sort of your main thing. You're gonna zigzag it back and forth across the garden. It's fairly malleable, but getting some little pins to sort of help you do that. And I recommend laying it all out up and down your garden bed in whatever pattern you've decided or your irrigation guys help you figure out. Lay it all out first. Have it mostly where you think you're going to want, how you normally plant your rows. Don't worry, it moves once you start to actually put plants in the ground, but I'll get to why we want to roughly lay it all out first. And then the second thing that you're going to need is, if you like to direct sow, i.e. put your seeds straight into the dirt and not actually transplant a ready to go starter plant, you're also going to need overhead sprayers. And this, of course, you don't need these per se. You can just use a handheld sprayer for, the first few weeks of your season to get all your seeds off the ground and growing. But I prefer to set up my irrigation system on a timer and have all of my overhead sprayers do the irrigation for my seeds. So I've got here 2 different ones. And which one you use, again, is entirely up to the design of your garden. But you've got a 180-degree sprayer, so it's only going to blast half of a circle essentially, or a 360-degree sprayer, exactly what it sounds like, one big giant circle. So depending on what your bed design looks like, either of these is a really great option. I kind of use a mixture of them for really no other reason than the very first year I went and had someone help me with mapping it out, and they suggested these for certain things and these, and I ended up with just half and half. And I really don't find anyone necessarily better than the other. Just depends on what you want or how your design is going to go. Now you'll probably notice that they've got little stakes on the bottom, but that this one has a really tall piece to it. These little extension pieces, they actually come, I think they're usually like default about 12 inches or so, and then you cut it down to wherever you want, or you can buy without and just buy a really short stake. So again, it depends on what you want to water. Do you want to broadcast a bigger area? Do you have some tall plants that you're gonna maybe need to get water over? Then you may want something with an extension. If you're not super worried about that and you just want to broadcast like fairly close to the dirt, you're gonna maybe wanna go with a shorter one. And the fun thing is as I mentioned, it's all kind of like Lego pieces. So you basically just screw all your parts and pieces together. So this little stake piece is one piece, the riser is another piece, the spray head emitter is another piece that screws off. This tubing is tubing without any holes. So this tubing is actually all the way connected to my 3/4 inch feeder line. So I've got holes poked in. And then I've also got this, which also would connect to my 3/4 inch feeder line, but this has the drip actually in the line. So there's 2 different 1/4 inch lines, one with drip emitters in it, and then one that just kind of feeds out to your sprayers. So what you're gonna need to do is, again, for me, lazy gardener, I'm automating everything I possibly can. So I'm using both of these. I have both of these evenly distributed throughout all of my gardens so that when I seed start directly into my garden, I actually lots of times don't even hook this up. I have little on-off switches and I just leave this off and I leave this to do the overhead watering. And then once my plants start to establish and they're getting a little bit bigger and I know that they'll have put down roots a little bit further, I may start to incorporate both, or I may just switch right over to fully into my drip, and then I'll turn these off. You could most definitely just buy overhead sprayers and water your whole entire garden with just that and forego using an actual drip line. However, this is more efficient on water. So if you are paying for water, or you just know that you don't often get enough rainwater to water your garden, whatever the reason is, if you need to be super efficient, this is going to be, the actual drip lines are the way to go. Also, a lot of vegetables don't particularly love having their leaves wet. Things like, oh gosh, anything in the nightshade family. So your tomatoes, your peppers, even potatoes. Lots of blight and fungal diseases tend to show up in those guys if the leaves keep getting wet all the time. Your cucumbers, anything in the squash family, fungus in the form of like powdery mildews tend to show up. So it's not usually a good idea to keep overhead watering. It's better to just put the water right on the dirt and try and kind of resist all that splashback wherever possible. So that is why I have both of these in my garden and why I use both of them in the garden. And right as of now, I don't actually have all of my irrigation hooked up to the tap and fully functioning, but as you can see, it's all laid out for the most part and it's ready. So all I have to do is start to lay the rest of my seeds in the ground, transplant where I want to, and then all I got to do is hook up everything and I'm off to the races and ready to go. I don't have to be rushing to try and get my irrigation together so that I can get my plants in the ground. It's just sitting and it's ready and everything is good to go. Now, if you want to find out my order of operations for preparing the garden and the seed beds, check out the video linked here, also linked in the description, for my full 9 essential spring garden prep tips so that you can work through all of them in order. This is just one sort of detailed look at sort of the middle of my journey to getting my garden ready for the springtime. And it's nice because the way that I've sort of structured it, I can do a lot of prep before my last frost date, which is probably not here yet. We might even have a couple more weeks yet before we're officially in the clear, but it allows me a little bit of a more relaxed, slow journey to getting my garden ready. So I hope this helps. If you like this video and you are wanting to make sure you don't miss any future ones, hit that subscribe button, hit a like if you enjoyed it, and check out that original first video, my 9 essential garden spring prep tips, and we will see you guys again soon. Have a great day.